Bearded Heretics. Oh no, not Bearded Heretics. Answers and Reasons. Psyched. How cool. How cool. We're back. We're back with Psyched, the freshest fresh air sci-fi show. I love saying that because there's still not a new show. Philip was thinking about it. But he hasn't done one yet, and I would like Philip to do one, but yeah, he's having fun as a student, so yeah, I'm still the freshest. Um, how's everyone doing today? Is everyone good? Nice to see you, Lone Wolf. Nice to see you, Dave. Nice to see you, Craig. Pleasure to have you all here. Craig, that fight you've been having on Twitter has been entertaining me endlessly, I have to say. It's been very fun. Dave, already off with the jokes today. So, let me know if everything's good, if the sound's good. Going to make a start today. We are going to be talking about levels of analysis, what they are, why they're important more than anything, and what's the best way of using them. And this really came about from a yes, both Craig, both fights. Craig said the Hunt fight or the other one. Both, they were both pretty pretty horrendous. I had my popcorn out and everything. um so yeah, this came about through another Twitter exchange I had quite a while ago at this point. I don't even remember who said it, but it was quite an interesting revelation that somebody had, well, not I had, due to how somebody responded to something. So they said that they were talking about something to do with psychology, and they were relating it to like a biological approach to psychology. And I said, well, if we think about this purely from a psychological perspective, and then said an explanation to something, and then their response was along the lines of, what do you mean purely psychological response? This seems like some sort of dualism. And for those of you that may not know, I mean, it would be very surprising if you're a watcher of Answers and Reason and you're not aware of this. But dualism is the idea that the mind and body are two separate entities, and that the mind is separate from the body. Not something I ascribe to. Not something I think many atheists ascribe to. I think there are some potentially, because as many atheists like to remind us all the time that atheism is just relating to one thing, which is whether you believe in God or not. But dualism tends to have some sort of magical element to it, usually. I mean, there's some other variants of dualism. I'm not a philosophy person, so I don't really know. But yeah, I was not talking about dualism in that sense. I was talking about levels of analysis. So that's why I'm here to explain it, because it seems like, despite the um, rhetoric that atheists really understand science, they continue to demonstrate that. Well, I say they. I am an atheist, but many atheists continue to demonstrate that they don't actually really understand science at all. And then Wolf says, if you believe in a soul, you are a dualist. It has come up on my one. There we go. Which is true. That is true. You're a dualist if you believe in a soul. Specifically, if you believe that soul is where your mind is held. I think. So, what is a level of analysis? Well, the idea is that basically, whenever you look at something and you're looking at it, trying to figure out how it works, there are different ways you can do that. You can look at it very, 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 very closely. You can look at it a little bit further away, or you can look at it further away still. So for instance, like if we were thinking about a car and how a car works, you could describe it on the Hivesci. Hello, Hivesci. I don't know if I've seen you on, one of my streams before, so hello and welcome. Are you new? I bet you're buzzing to be here. That's funny. If we look at a car, we can look at it in a few different ways. We can look at it at the uh, kind of the smallest level, which is looking at how, I don't know, the springs work and how the um, spark what is it called, a spark plug, how that works, how each individual component, even within smaller components, works. That's like that would be the first level of analysis in that situation. The second level of analysis will be looking at the larger components and how they interact with each other. So how does the clutch uh, interact with the gears? You know, how does the wheels interact with the steering wheel? You know, so that would be like the second level of analysis. And then if we go out even further, we can look at the car as a whole and how it works as an entire thing. You know, looking at looking at it from the perspective of maybe like, um, uh, a vehicle, like it can get you from point A to point B because of this thing. Yeah. Um, Newish. I've subbed a long time ago. Oh well, welcome to the side chat. It gets a bit hectic. Lots of people try to derail me. So, uh, yeah. Is it a car of Theseus? Yes. Is it an Aston Martin? Also, yes. How did you know that, Lone Wolf, that this car that I'm talking about is the car of Theseus and an Aston Martin? Specifically, it's an Aston Martin. Yeah. I don't know how you knew that, but you did. You figured it out. So that would be like the levels of analysis. So in psychology, the levels of analysis are kind of worked out by the schools of thinking. Um, so we have um, the first one would be kind of biological or physiological psychology or neuropsychology. They're kind of similar. Then you'd have cognitive psychology. Then you'd have social psychology. Yeah. And what this kind of does as well is bridge the gap between the kind of the hard sciences and the soft sciences, right? Because in the hard sciences you have physics, chemistry, and biology, which are three levels of analysis anyway. So physics is the particles, chemistry is how the particles interact together. Um, More so like how they respond, like kind of yeah, you know what I mean, chemically, how two different sets of particles chemically interact, and then biology is how that interacts within an organism. Yeah, so you kind of have three levels of analysis there, and in psychology you have physiological psychology, where you analyze how the body interacts with behavior. Then you have cognitive, which is like kind of the um, well, then you kind of had cognitive neuroscience, which bridged the gaps between like the brain and thoughts, and then you have cognitive, which is just the thoughts and like cognitive models, which is like the models of like memory, for instance, like working memory model. Um, and then you have like social psychology, which is more about how we interact as an individual within a social setting, and then that kind of goes on to sociology, which is the study of social groups. So it's not individuals within social groups; it's social groups as a whole. And so it kind of bridges that gap. This level of analysis bridges that gaps from one side of science to, well, one level of analysis to a like a wider lens, essentially. And that's what I like to think about when I'm thinking of levels of analysis, is like how close in are you looking? Because and I guess this, now we've explained what it is, this is kind of why it's important, because you can develop, you can look at a you know a car and describe it in terms of physics, in terms of how the particles are moving and interacting with each other. Um, that would be feasible and possible, but it would be, one, really complicated, and two, um, it wouldn't make much sense. to a lot of people because it'll be that complex. Because there's so many moving parts to do the arithmetic for a physics based approach to how the car as a not just the car's like velocity, but like how the car works won't make much sense. Whereas if you do it from an engineering perspective, it starts to make a whole lot of sense because you don't have to worry too much about the individual particles and you know and the chemistry of it. It's just this is how the car works. The petrol goes in here, it gets burnt by the thingy thing, and that drives the motor, and the motor turns the wheels, and the more you press on this pedal, and I'm sure engineering people will be like, that's a really bad, uh, that's a really bad way of describing engineering. It is. I'm not an engineer, but it's the same thing. Yeah. So like, we could explain psychology through physics as well. We could explain psychology through purely the electric potentials within the neurons. They go from minus 70 something to minus less than 70 something, minus 50 something, and that sends an electric signal down the nerve, and um, that triggers this response. We could do it that way, and then we could also do it on a biological level, which is thinking about how those signals interact in a more detailed fashion as an organism, and how the neurotransmitters and stuff operate and stuff like that. And that would give us a bit more of a clue, but it won't make much sense kind of thinking about what we're actually trying to figure out. And what we're trying to figure out in psychology is why people behave the way that they do. Now, I could say, yeah, serotonin increases your feeling of contentedness, and it's like that happy hormone or whatever. It makes you feel happy. And oxytocin makes you feel more connected to others and makes you feel in love. I could say that, but that's not really a biological explanation because I'm highlighting the neurotransmitter and then saying what it does, but not saying the mechanism behind that, the biological mechanism behind that, because it's unclear at the moment. It's not very clear why these neurotransmitters or hormones work in the way that they do, and that is why biological explanations for psychology are still lacking at the moment. Whereas we do have really good working models in both cognitive science, cognitive psychology, and social psychology, which predict behavior accurately and and explain the behavior really well. They don't rely on this like kind of like microscopic lens to look at the um, biology behind that. We can work on the biology later, but what we're trying to figure out is this wider angle concept of what are the thoughts people are having, because people have thoughts. How is that making them behave? What order does it come in? How does it interact with like cognitive concepts such as schemas or scripts or distortions? All of these things work. They work as a model for our behavior and the way that we think, and they're accurate and they're repeatable, so they're scientific. um but the biology of if we tried to explain it just using biological terms, it would be very difficult to do that in a meaningful way that people will understand. And so levels of analysis basically allow us to explain different phenomenon, because physics will be very good at explaining the how the neurons fire. Chemistry will be really good at chemistry will be really good at explaining how the neurons fire as well, because they're electrochemical reactions. It's not just electricity running down your nerves, they're electrochemical reactions. So chemistry will do a really good job of that. Chemistry will do a really good job of helping us understand what neurotransmitters are, how they're developed, how they're synthesized in our brains, how we can synthesize them outside of our brains so that we can develop medication, such as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which are antidepressants. Um, Chemistry will do a really good job of understanding what is in the cell, And then biology, this is where we get it. They all overlap. You see, biology is the same thing, and biology will help us understand kind of uh, the neural network, the neural system in its entirety, how it interacts with the rest of the body, how we have things like the regulation of our temperature, and how the brain interacts with that process. But none of these can effectively explain behavior in a way that psychology can, because of the lens that it has on it. And they're all elements, they're all needed in order for us to understand really what's going on in our brains and what's going on as people. We need to understand these mechanisms, but ultimately it's not the right language to describe to people why they behave the way they behave. It's the wrong level of analysis to look at it. So when I said to that individual, from a purely psychological perspective, I meant cognitive. I meant we're going to take biology out of this. We're just going to use a model that's based on psychology only. They thought I was talking about dualism because they see science as this kind of one-dimensional thing that only has one level of analysis, which is looking at the raw kind of physical stuff that's in front of you. And that's not how science works. Science is about looking at ideas and breaking it down through experimentation and other forms of research, uh, in order to figure out a model that works in predicting future instances of that phenomena. And psychology does that. It's not necessarily looking at like physical things in front of it, but it uses the same methods as biology, chemistry, and physics in order to achieve that. And so it's not any less of a level of analysis as those others. So there you go. That's the main thing. I got through that very quickly. Actually, is there any questions about that? Kimo says it all boils down to chemistry in the end. Actually, it all boils down into maths. Like maths is the most pure science there is. Like because you always get one. What you always get two when you add 1 to 1. That's a good question, actually. Do you think maths is a science? I want to know your guys' thoughts. Is maths a science? Now, even within, like, even within like the schools of thought in psychology, there are multiple levels of analysis as well. So for instance, in social psychology, there is intra-individual, inter-individual, positional, and ideological, and these are different levels of analysis within social psychology. Looking at intra-individual will be kind of looking within the self. Inter-individual will be looking at the self as part of a group. Positional will be where that position in the hierarchy, and ideological is looking at the kind of concepts that are made out, the concepts that person follows from a like kind of wider societal basis. So there's even levels of analysis within like social psychology. And you can even probably dig even deeper into that, within cognitive psychology, or yeah, within cognitive psychology, you have like kind of like broad theories of how cognition works. So the overall kind of like system of the brain as a computer or an information processing mechanism, and then you have like looking at the individual things. So like you might be a cognitive psychologist that's focusing on certain specific types of schemas. So you'll be honing in on that mechanism within the wider context of cognitive science, um, when someone else will be looking at the entire process itself. psychology is all in your mind. It is all in your mind. The study of maths is a science. Maths is strictly speaking a language. Is it now? Oh yeah, I guess that's true because you're describing the world through an arbitrary system of communication. You're like communicating a system through the language of maths. Yeah, I get that. And it's maths. Yeah, maths. Kind of reminds me how Searle's take on property dualism, although I'm sure he would have denied it. You'll have to remind me of that take, Kamo, so I can comment on it because I would like to, but I'm not sure if I know much about it. Now, I think there's a like a good way of thinking about this, and I think that this is important, because this is really basic level science, to be honest. Like this, I did this because it'll be an easy thing for me to send people when they're getting the levels of analysis wrong. Um, but there's an easy way of like thinking about it, um, which is thinking about the parts and then the sum of the parts. Yeah. So like if we go back to a car or a bike, you can figure out how like the parts work individually. You can figure out how like the gears change, um, the chain on the bike, or how the handlebars move the front wheel, or you can research how uh, the force keeping the bike up works. But then you can also take in the holistic thing of the bike and figure out how the bike as a whole interacts with the world. So what speed can it go off? How does friction affect it? All this stuff. So it's kind of like just thinking about both those things. And I think that when people are really into like things like cars and bikes, they'll be able to tell you a lot about the different. I couldn't tell you anything about different engines and how they affect things, how different tires affect things, how different spoilers on the backs of cars, how that affects driving. I couldn't tell you any of that, but there's people that do know that stuff, right? And they'll be able to say everything about that, and that is kind of the levels of analysis. It's like looking at each individual thing and then um, seeing how they work individually and then putting that all together to look at the bigger picture. Yeah, that's kind of how it is, and then you can see how like the lower level of analysis would be looking at those individuals, and then the higher level of analysis will be looking at the performance of that car in a race. Yeah. And it's important that we do this. It's really key that we do this because what we have is um, if we get stuck thinking in one dimension of science, if we think, okay, right, the only school of thought is biology when it comes to psychology, that's the only thing we should consider psychology to be, is biological processes. And that's the only thing that you're going to look at when you're studying psychology. I'm just going to look at the biology. How does the neurotransmitter affect people? How does the brain, the lesions on the brain affect people? How does the imbalance of neurotransmitters and um, the depth of the folds and the ratio of grey matter to white matter and the the interaction of the nerves within the stomach and stuff. If we just look at all that stuff, that's not going to give us the picture that we need in order to make effective models of behavior. It doesn't tell you anything about thoughts. It doesn't tell you anything about emotions. And that's the thing, actually. I think Dave said it earlier. It's phenomenology all the way down. And I'm not sure if this is what you meant, Dave, but the thing that's missing in biological psychology is phenomenology. And and I hate to say it, but this is because of the hard problem of consciousness, right? Um, because the hard problem of consciousness means that you can't take um a like someone help me with the hard problem of consciousness. You can't extrapolate phenomenology from the workings of the brain. You need to find a way of bridging that gap, essentially. Like we can figure out how the brain affects phenomenology, but we can't figure out the hard problem is figuring out why the brain produces phenomenology, I think. And because of that, if we just explain behavior through biology, we'd be hundreds of years off making any progress in psychology. And Mark Caesar makes another good point. Doctors are more effective when they view the body holistically. I suppose it would be the same with psychologists viewing the brain psych holistically. Yeah. So psychologists, you get very varying kind of approach from different psychologists who have trained in different schools. So if you get like a psychoanalytic um, psychologist, they're more likely to think of trauma and upbringing and um, desires and kind of the more kind of like abstract psychological models that we think of um, into the thing, and it'll be about your relationship to those things. Whereas like a cognitive neuroscientist will be looking at the serotonin and the neurotransmitter levels and how this is impacting your thoughts and whether there's cognitive distortions coming from it. Um, I think personally that they should be taken into consideration together because they interact with each other. So cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of based on the idea that they interact because it takes two things, your thoughts and your behavior, and it says we can change either one of these and it will have the same effect. We can change both of these and the effect will be um, multiplied essentially. So if you change your behavior and you change the thought processes behind it, they will have a multiplier, like yeah, multiplying effect on each other because your behavior helps to change your thoughts and your thoughts help to change your behavior. And that's essentially what CBT aims to do. It does cognitive restructuring, which is taking cognitive distortions or problematic cognitions, such as intrusive thoughts, and reframes them in a positive way. So, um, if you have a phobia against dogs because one bit you as a kid, is it rational to think that all dogs will bite you? It's not rational, and uh, that can be evidence that not all dogs will bite you. So therefore, you can start to reframe that cognition as, you know, not all dogs are harmful. And then your behavior will be going and petting a dog that's not going to bite you, and that will reinforce the new thought that you have, and then your new thought will reinforce the behavior of feeling okay and safe in that moment when you're petting any dog, and then it increases, and that's the whole idea of CBT. Um, but then I think that there's an element there of what CBT misses is the trauma aspect of it, because the reason that you're afraid of dogs is because of trauma, past experience, and affecting you today. Um, so what CBT would benefit from is having a psychoanalytic approach where some of that trauma is discussed a little bit as well. So you go through the conversations around the trauma. Meanwhile, you're also doing this support around kind of like changing the thought processes and um, changing the behaviors, and that would be the holistic view. And then maybe you might also, if it caused a depression in the person or anxiety might be more likely, anxiety in the person, you could also prescribe some they call them anti anxiolytics or something. um, prescribe some of those, and then that person is aided by the medication change, which impacts the physiology, um, and they can build this new experience through feeling calmer because of the medication, whilst also going through the conversation around their trauma, and then also doing the thought record changes or the cognitive restructuring and the behavior restructuring, and that would be the best. And the problem is that's three different types of therapy, um, which no one's going to pay for, except for really rich people. You know, because you've got medical therapy, you've got pharmacological therapies, you've got psychoanalytic, and then cognitive behavioral. So no, they're not feel good drugs. They're not feel good drugs. They're a sticking plaster. I always say that, you know, like psychological therapies are like physiotherapy rather than medication, or even like, yeah, rather than medication. Like the medication for psychology, the medication will are like painkillers more than anything. Like, so if you break your leg, you'll get painkillers to help with the pain, but it won't. There's no way that your leg's going to heal properly if you don't then do physiotherapy. So you can take the painkillers whilst you're doing the physiotherapy, and then you'll also be getting the therapy that will actually help you to heal faster. And psychology is kind of more like that. Like, you know, if you're taking drugs, yes, that will help you, but it will just help with the symptoms and it won't help with the underlying cause. And if you want to mend the underlying cause, you need to go through some sort of talking therapy, whether that's CBT or psychoanalytic or counseling or cat therapy or ACT therapy or DBT, any of those things, you know, and whatever it is, you know, you've got to be prepared to put work in. And the therapy is the number one um, kind of thing that demonstrates that therapy is going to work is the willingness for that individual to engage in it. And if that person wants to engage with it, then the therapy is more effective. And if that person doesn't want to engage in it, then the therapy is not effective. And it's the same with physiotherapy. It takes a long time for something to heal on its own if you're not doing the work that you need to, given to you by the physiotherapist. So, get a cat. Oh, I started it. I didn't mean to. I don't want to unstart it. I don't want to do that. Get a cat. Best therapy ever. Yeah, they're good. Dogs are good too. The reason cats and dogs are good for therapy is because they increase our serotonin and oxytocin levels and dopamine levels. They trigger our reward system, which are dopamine. They trigger our happiness thing, which we get from like social interaction, which is serotonin, and they trigger our like love and attachment or neurotransmitter, which is oxytocin. They trigger all three, and therefore you get a good response from it. But the problem is with like that kind of thing is, again, you may not be addressing the actual problem that's causing you to need that. Um, and you can become dependent on having animals around, rather than it being like you just said, just don't turn into a mad cat lady. Rather than it being something that's actually just there to help maintain like a higher level of mental well-being. So you just got to be cautious with, you know, I respect that not everyone can afford. I mean, I can't afford private therapy, and the therapy on the NHS is, um, let's say it leaves me wanting. You know, you got these IAP services which are supposed to be improving access to psychological therapy services. They're all private companies. None of them are owned by government, and they're commissioned by the NHS to provide um, psychological therapies to people with mild to moderate depression and anxiety, and they're backlogged to the nine. And the because you have to be referred to them, that takes it takes about 6 weeks for the referral to go through. Once you get there, it's about 2 weeks before you have your first session after you do an assessment tour and they assess whether you're viable for their service. Then once you do that, you get 8 weeks of therapy, which is once a week. And if you miss one, then I've heard of people being basically struck off immediately if they've missed one. And who are the most likely people to miss appointments? People who are depressed and anxious about going to appointments. Like, you know, and 8 sessions isn't enough to really get deep in anything. They basically just chuck a bunch of coping mechanisms at you and then send you on your jolly way. You know, if you really want to have an effective change on someone, you need a good amount of sessions. Probably around 20 to 25, I would say. A lot of times, I found that medicines and therapies basically buy you time to be able to address the problems you have, either physically or mentally. Mental problems probably need therapy too. Yeah, mental problems definitely need therapy. If you think about how people approach mental health, they see it as this abstract thing, and now it's like kind of weird, right? We all get like little cuts and bruises from everyday life, yeah, and those things sometimes they scar, sometimes they um, leave their mark in some way, sometimes they're around for a while, um, but we kind of get used to them, we kind of accept them, and we move on, and we get the same kind of little cuts and bruises on our psychology that impact us in certain ways, and those things are present with us. Like they might scar in our psychology, or they might um, leave their mark in some way. But the problem is that people pathologize them now. Like we don't need hospital treatment for from cutting our hand open on a can opener or something. You know, um, and I would say that most people don't need hospital treatment or any kind of like. A lot of people, I don't think, need necessarily GP intervention for the level of um, psychological issues that they have, but people are very trigger happy with it now, um, which is problematic because it's that's what's bunging the system up. And there are people who really struggle who have um, maybe a little bit more of a have had a little bit more of an impact. Like they do need to be seen by a doctor. Maybe like if we hit a vein with a can opener, we'll need to see a doctor. Um, and they're kind of getting lost in the system a bit because it's bunged up because people are pathologizing, and by that I mean they're making out like normal behavior is pathological, as in it's an illness basically, when it's not. And then these people become very uh, the people that need it become more ill because they're not receiving the help that they need. You know, I would never tell anyone who's having problems psychologically not to seek therapy or to go to um, the doctors, but I would say that if it's not disrupting your life in any way, in any meaningful way, then it's quite easy to find coping strategies and stuff yourself. I think the problem is the taboo of talking about and feeling, yeah, talking about ourselves as people and um, being honest about our behavior. If I was honest about some of the things that I do that might indicate some issues, um, that's different to me pathologizing them because it's about me owning them and saying, okay, yeah, I could probably change this. Like I could change the fact that I can't run very far by exercising. I could change the fact that simultaneously I could change the fact that I'm not very good at expressing my emotions by exercising my skill at expressing my emotions and practicing. That doesn't take a doctor or a therapist to do that. It just takes me being um, aware of that as an issue, owning it, taking responsibility for it, and doing something in order to uh, make it better. If I don't do that, it could develop into something worse, and maybe I will need a therapeutic. It will be a pathology then. I will need a doctor at that point. But right now, just like, if I don't look after my physical health, eventually, potentially, I will need a doctor for that as well. But we shouldn't take the first step and think that's pathologically wrong. Like, not everyone needs to see a therapist because they have these minor psychological or mental health problems. If it's disrupting your life, like extremely, then I would say you need to see a doctor. Mark Caesar says honesty. Now, there's another thought when it comes to our psychological health. I think not just honesty and ownership. Yeah, there was this TikTok that I saw. I don't know how whether I've spoken about this before, but there was a TikTok that I saw where this um, woman was talking about CBT and how it gaslights her because it makes her out to be the problem in a world that should accommodate her. And I found that really problematic because there was no responsibility taken there. Now, if I go into a space and there's something that makes me feel anxious or frustrated or something, I can't expect everyone in that space to accommodate my anxiety. I just can't. I can't do that. Yeah, about that thing. People may not know me. People may not know what my needs are. People may not know what triggers me, and we can't make every environment safe for every possible person that would enter that space. I need to take ownership of that and realize that that's my thing to work with and work on. Just like how, you know, the world can't accommodate my not wanting to walk, and the shop is 20 minutes away. Why isn't there a shop on every block so that people can walk 10 seconds to get to a shop? It's the same thing. Yeah, part of us needs to be able to understand what is in our remit to change and think about, and what is it we should expect of the world. Um, and CBT helps you rationalize what you should be expecting of the world and what you shouldn't be. Like for instance, if one dog bites you, that doesn't mean all dogs are going to bite you. Yeah. So if you now have a phobia of dogs and it's impacting on your life for whatever reason, maybe you run into roads in order to avoid dogs, and that's dangerous. Yeah, and you've almost been run over a couple of times. That's your responsibility. People are just walking their dogs. You can't expect dog owners to just cross the road when they see you because they don't know you. You know. Society puts pressure on men in particular to suck it and pretend everything is fine. That's absolutely true. And I think this is improving. Like, this conversation is improving. Um, but the problem with this is that very few men take the responsibility and own the fact that they struggle with opening up about their emotions. They, and this is the thing with psychology. A lot of people are very accepting of who they are, and they don't want to change who they are. I have a friend who has ADHD, and it's not Joe, a different friend, and he didn't want to take medication for ages for it because he was worried about um, it changing who he is as a person. He was like, I don't want to change who I am as a person. And recently he took the drugs, and he was like, I can't believe I didn't do this sooner because it's had a real impact on him. It didn't change him at all. It just helped him be able to focus. He was worried that all of these creative thoughts that he had were going to go out of his head, but they didn't. I have a I have a friend. That's a lie. Okay. Oh, ouch. I joke. That was painful. That hurt. He thought all these creative thoughts were going to leave his head, and he really enjoyed having these creative thoughts. But he also really struggled to hold down jobs. He really struggled to hold down relationships. He really struggled to make it to any form of appointments. He took the medication and his life changed. He became much more focused, much more reliable. He's now in a stable job. He's got a relationship that's stable, and he hasn't changed. He's not changed intrinsically who he is. He doesn't feel that way. So that fear was not right. Um, and I think it's the same with these men. Like, they don't want to change who they are. They don't want to remain who they are, and they think that if they go to therapy or if they take medication for whatever reason, or if they even consider the idea of working through that to become more of an emotional being, it will essentially change who they are, and it's fallacious. In Australia, we have an "Are You OK" program where we encourage to recognise that those may have problems and talk about those things with them. Yeah, these programs are good, but the problem I have a bit of beef with um, with this, uh, not with this specifically, but I think a lot of these programs are very super. I don't know this program specifically, but a lot of these programs are very superficial, and the problem with them is that they just say things like ask twice or ask if someone's okay, or if someone's struggles with their emotional communication, that's not going to help that much. And it is trying to give people simple tricks to help their friends and family. I get that. It's a step in the right direction. I agree with you, Mark. Simultaneously, it is a oversimplification of what's needed in society. Um, and it's also an oversimplification of what um, naturally how men are when it comes to their emotions. Like, there's this idea that the reason that men are, oh my goodness, Philip Miller has joined the chat. There's this idea that men take their own lives because they struggle to communicate their emotions, but it's actually deeper than that. That's an element of it, but it's not the primary thing. And it's certainly hello Philip. It's not the core reason men take. I disagree with that as a sentiment. It's usually to do with financial or relational losses that undermines their entire reason of existence. Yeah. What's this? What's the French saying? Être de vie or something. I don't know. No, that would be to be alive. Yeah, it has been a while. What's all relative? Now, the lack of ability to communicate emotionally will be a part of that, but what's more important is helping them to see themselves as a valuable individual without the need to be successful in certain areas of their life, such as financially or relationally. Like, I feel I am a valuable human no matter how much I'm earning or if I'm in a relationship. And that's something I've had to work on because I used to think of like status being really key and important. And if I don't have a good job, if I don't have a family by this time in my life, then I'm a failure. And it's like, why am I setting up these standards? Like, let me just live my life. I'm important, and I think that that's a big part of it. Is not just the emotional communication that men struggle with. It's the understanding themselves as an important figure despite their financial importance or success. Because that's when you tend to see the biggest spike is like 40 to 50-year-old men who have just had a financial loss in some way, maybe lost a job, or or um, have recently become divorced or separated from their family or don't have access to their children. Emotional intelligence is not a risk factor. So there you go. We've talked about a lot of different things. Actually, I have not stuck to the to the topic title whatsoever. Philip, when are you going to start your show on Answers and Reason? So anyway, mental health is interesting. I should just do a well. It'd be hard to know what to talk about. If I just did a stream on mental health, that could be anything. But we just got to be more aware of ourselves, and we got to be more willing to change. I think soon, yes. Oh, what's it going to be about? Oh, I just took it off before it come on. Soon. We can't pathologize every little thing. You know, if I'm feeling down for a few days in a row, I can't think, oh, I'm mentally ill. I might be mentally unwell, but we just got to be careful with the way that we phrase things. That's okay. Just start talking. That's basically what I've done today because I went through the levels of analysis stuff like real quick, and then like this came up, and I was like, "This is something I'm interested in." So thank you all for being so attentive and listening to me babble on. I might start wrapping stuff. It's gonna be your show, but with the correct takes one day later. That's so funny. The correct takes. What's so like if I say like panpsychism is definitely not true? You'll be like, panpsychism is true. That was my impression of you, by the way, Philip. Panpsychism is true. Oh. It's the best impression you'll ever get. If you ever see Philip talk, he talks exactly like that. So, levels of analysis. um, there are different levels of analysis. It's, don't expect there to just be one level of analysis if you're like thinking shouldn't be. If you're thinking uh you forgot about all that. What all the panpsychism stuff? Are you not a panpsychist anymore? Oh god, this is a good question. When you watch someone lose their mind, does it all happen does it happen all at once or is it a gradual process like happening in slow motion? This is gonna be interesting because it's both. It can be either one. Um you were never a panpsychist. Why did we have those arguments then? We're gonna have to chat about this, Philip, because no, you were just saying that you didn't think that the mind was. I can't remember. I can't remember. It was a long time ago now. Anyway, once you watch someone lose their mind, does it happen all at once? I think mental illness is one of those things that's a bit like if think about it like it's physical illness. That is the best way um, for me to describe it because it is about the first few things we got to think about: is it detrimental to their well-being? So, people who are having hallucinations, who can maybe either tell that they're hallucinations, or who where it doesn't actually impact on their life in any way. Like they can still continue to work, they can still continue to use roads safely, they can have relationships, and it doesn't impact on them. Is that pathological? I would say no. Just because they're not perceiving reality in the same way as other people, it's not pathological because it's not having a detriment to their health. So that's something that's really key. If it's not having a detriment to their life, things become disorders as they become disorderly. Yeah. So some people, it will, um, if it impacts on their relationships or their ability to work or their ability to look after themselves or their ability to stay safe in a community, then it will become a disorder. Just like our health, physical health, if our physical health gets to the point where our body is in danger, um, like maybe our cholesterol levels are slightly high, that's okay. Like having slightly high cholesterol levels is fine. Having really high cholesterol levels or cholesterol levels that are really high is not okay, and that's when it becomes a problem, and that's when you get prescribed medication and stuff. But the doctor's not going to give you anything if they're only slightly high, right? When someone becomes mentally ill, it can happen really suddenly. It can happen due to a very stressful situation. It can happen due to drugs or alcohol use. One time, there was this woman who I supported on the ward. She was young. She was a university student who went to a Buddhist retreat. In the Buddhist retreat, that spiked their food with hallucinogens. The hallucinogen had caused her to have drug-induced psychosis. She had one of the most severe psychotic episodes I've seen somebody have in my entire career. It lasted 2 weeks. She had to have constant doses of some of the um, strongest antipsychotic medication we had, um, which they called Accuphase, which uh, is very rare to be used, and it knocks people out. So she was either knocked out or acting very psychotically, having hallucinations, delusions. When she eventually came out of her psychotic state, she still had some psychotic experiences, but she couldn't remember anything that had happened to her during that psychotic episode. Um, so that was a very quick transition where it just happened. Like it was just one thing triggered it. Stress can trigger it as well. Like intense traumatic experiences can trigger it immediately. However, mental ill health as well also can occur from progressive not taking care of your mental well-being. So if you're continually stressed, if you're tired, if you're getting into disputes with people, um, if you have a series of small traumatic experiences, like people leaving your life in a short period of time, but they're smaller, that can trigger it. You know, loneliness can trigger it over a prolonged period of time, or isolation. So it can be slow as well. Um, so yeah, it really depends. Joe says the mind doesn't exist, and then it's all in your mind. If the mind doesn't exist, how can it all be in mind? Having a mind is mental illness. No, it can just be an instant thing. It can just be, you take something or something happens, and then immediately it's you're it's like an intense traumatic experience. Like, if we think about let's think about broken legs for an instance. You can break your leg due to severe trauma, or you can break your leg because you didn't eat enough cheese, and then your bones aren't dense enough, and then you kind of step weirdly, right? That's a bad example, but you see what I'm saying. Yeah, this is quite normal. I say it's quite normal. This is not unusual to me. I was in a room with a person the other day who started accusing me of being a different person. Like she literally thought I was a different person wearing a me skin. Yeah, yeah, I've seen that a lot. Lots of people who have psychotic delusions will think that the people around them are being replaced by aliens or the MI6 or something like that, and that they're not. They're imposters. This is a really common delusion. This is psychosis, though, so I hope that person is receiving help, because that is a psychotic delusion. Okay, well, yeah, then they may be having a psychotic break. If it's the person you're talking about before, that wouldn't be a midlife crisis. That would be a midlife crisis is where somebody spends all their money because they want to do something that they always wish they had done. Yeah, this sounds like. How can you recognize your mental health degrading before it comes too late? I think it's about noticing change. It's a bit like noticing your health. Again, I think thinking about it as if it was physical health is really helpful because you can notice when you feel like a little bit more out of breath, or you feel like uh, you have like a blocked up nose, or you feel your body aches, your arms ache or your legs ache. You can feel when you're unwell. Yeah. With mental health, it's a different. You have to notice something different. And you have to reflect a little bit more because it's not as immediately obvious. But if you're more irritable, if you're more, if you're perceiving things which would normally be quite innocuous as hostile from other people, that's a big one. So if someone's acting normally towards you, but you're thinking of that you're either finding them annoying or you're thinking that they're being hostile towards you, that's a sign that um, your mental health is deteriorating because you're starting to look out for more threats. Um, Maybe you feel more, you have more intrusive thoughts about how things are pointless, or you're not very good at things, or the um, you're useless or anything. That's a big one as well. Intrusive thoughts that you're not wanting to come up; they just automatically come into your thinking. Yeah, that's really key. Um, Pay attention to your physical body as well. Heart racing or palpitations that come out of nowhere. Um, Feeling dizzy or feeling frightened for no obvious reason. That's all signs that you're potentially becoming anxious. Um, if you're starting to have thinking around things that don't make sense as well, like if we're going into psychosis territory, you might believe things that just don't make sense. And in the early stages of psychosis, you can recognize that, and it's important to get help. Um, I think if you have any thoughts around wanting a big change in your life suddenly as well, then that could be a sign that your mental health is deteriorating as well. Such as just having the impulse to quit your job or the impulse to go somewhere else. It's not always that, but like those impulses can highlight that you're uncomfortable in the situation you're in. So I'd say that's a big one. Um, Now, if you just allow these things to fester, oh, self isolation as well. You want to spend time alone, and that's not normal. Then that's an indicator as well. Um, on the flip side, there are other things as well. Like if we're thinking about bipolar, then maybe you're finding it hard to sleep because you're too energetic, or you're finding it hard to not see people because you want to spend time with people all the time, and you talk quickly and you don't let other people talk. It's about being aware of what you're normally like. What is your normal presentation? Deviations from that could indicate change. If they're persistent, like if you had a cough for 2 weeks, then you'd go see a doctor about it. If these things persist and or they get worse, they deteriorate, then you should start to seek help at that point. Okay, that's good, but, it sounds like if she's thinking those kind of levels of delusions that there might be the need for a different type of therapy than counseling. I don't know how it works in America though, but try it out, see what happens. Yeah, that sounds like if she's thinking you're someone else in different skin, this could be part of the delusion as well. That'd be interesting. Keep Lone Wolf, if you want to keep me up to date on that, then please feel free. This is a tough one because I feel like no, but yes at the same time. If you're not spending time with people in person, then it can have negative psychological consequences to you because our bodies physically react to interpersonal contact um, in person. We get different hormonal and neurotransmitter releases due to that kind of contact. But at the same time, we can have very meaningful relationships um, with people online as well. Um, but I think the problem with online relationships a lot of the time um, is that we're usually masking something. We're usually presenting ourselves as something else to a certain extent, not entirely, but we don't give ourselves over. In-person relationships, it's really hard to hide your true identity or your true self. And I think in online, it's a lot easier to do that. It's a lot easier to regulate what you're saying and doing to appease other people, to present like you're something different. And I think that's a bit dangerous. It's not what everyone does. It's just it's easier to do um, because that I think that leads to lower self esteem in our general lives because we think this version of ourselves is better than the real us. That's why we're doing it. So I think there's pros and cons to each. I think it's okay to have healthy. I think people can have healthy online relationships, but I think that if it's the only socialization you're getting, I would be worried about that, and I think that it's worth thinking about why it is that's the case. Um, and know that there are going to be people who you may not know them yet, but there are going to be people local to you who will want to hang out with you and stuff if you're feeling like that the people in your area aren't very interested in you. There's always going to be people around. You just got to find them. Yeah, this is totally true, actually, Philip, and a really good point. It's sometimes harder to differentiate between the normal processing of trauma and something that is spiraling into something bigger. And that's why pausing to reflect on it and analyze it. And this isn't something we're all taught about physical health. We're all taught that, 2 weeks of pain, we go to doctors because it's not changing. We're all taught, like, if something gets worse, then you can access healthcare about it. And we're kind of taught how to monitor that. And our bodies kind of really easily tell us, oh, okay, this is getting worse. Oh yeah, you can't walk now. That's probably a reason to go to a doctor. Um, with our mental health, it's much different. We're one, the mental health services aren't adequate enough to cater to it, and two, we're not even taught what those things feel like. So it is really about giving yourself regular check-ins, um, being honest with your reflections, um, and taking the time to truly analyze your behavior and be honest about it. Um, you got to think, okay, it's not about idealism or like thinking what would I ideally like to be like, but what am I like on a good day? And if you're having 20 bad days in a row, it's probably something you can do about it. Whether that's seeking medical help or um, trying to exercise some of those skills in um, addressing it in your own personal life. But it is difficult to figure out the difference between a normal processing of trauma and something that is spiraling into something bigger. So you just got to keep an eye on it. and talk to people like friends, you know, family members, and listen to them. That's the one thing, when you talk to your friends and you're just trying to talk at them, and then they offer you some advice or some guidance around something, and you're like, I didn't want your advice, I just wanted to open up. And it's like, well, maybe actually listening to some advice would be good as well. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's not anxiety. It sounds like it's a delusion. Honestly, this is a really common delusion. This thing you said, that's a delusion. I've met probably about 30 or 40 people that have this, pretty much this exact same. There was a guy that just thought his parents had been replaced by clones, by aliens. Um, and identity theft is something that's kind of wrapped up into that, because it's about people being imposters and people not, yeah, people not being who they say they are. So I wouldn't call it anxiety. And I mean, there might be anxiety as a part of it, but the anxiety comes from a delusional thinking pattern rather than it being actual anxiety, which is kind of like linked to not rational beliefs, but not psychotic beliefs. But yeah, hopefully she gets the help she needs, and as I say, like, keep me updated, because psychosis, I have to say, is one of the hardest ones to help someone with, because the what to say and what not to say is so difficult. Um, you kind of have to try to fine line between not telling them outright that they're wrong, but also not um, validating the delusion, because you don't want to say, oh yeah, you're correct, because that will reinforce the delusion. Um, but you also don't want to cut them off, because that will break trust with them. So like with this kind of thing, with like the skin, like this thing, I wouldn't say like I'm not an imposter, because she really doesn't trust you, right? You need to say things like, what makes you think that? And then you'll start to get into the thoughts, and maybe she'll break it down to the point where she'll go, actually, maybe you're not, you know. Um, or you can just distract away from that conversation if you feel like it's too much for you to handle. It's tough, really. I think psychosis is one of those things that's really, professionals are the ones that need to manage it. I basically told her she was having a midlife crisis. Yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of stuff can work, because people can then reflect on their thoughts a little bit, and it might bring her out if she's like not in the depths of psychosis. But you got to be, yeah. That's not just a pure anxiety thought. That is delusion. It's 100% delusion. I guess it works. It works. Oh, Mark, I knew you were someone else. All right, guys, it's been a pleasure today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We got massively off topic. We spent a longer amount of time talking about mental health in general than levels of analysis, but I'm okay with that. So, just to recap, levels of analysis are just the levels that you analyze something. Biology, chemistry, physics, psychology, sociology, they're all levels of analysis. Within psychology, you have cognitive, biological, and social, as well as many others. And within those, you can have even more levels of analysis. And those levels allow you to explain the phenomena using a model to make it easier. And it's that simple. So whenever someone says, um, uh, oh, like, psychology is dualism, you can now say, no, it's just a different level of analysis. It doesn't imply dualism at all. Um, And we did have a brief analysis of your fiend friend. He said it first, not me. Friend, see, analysis of my friend. And then Mark says we haven't talked about the Super Bowl yet. Hey, I'm British. I don't watch American sports. I don't care about the Super Bowl. I don't care about the halftime show. Apparently, Rihanna's pregnant. There you go, sorted. There you go. We talked enough about it now. So yeah, guys, just we talked a lot there about mental health and stuff, and just all I'd say is just be. This what is psychology? Psychology is the study of human mind and behavior. There you go. The scientific study. The scientific study of the human mind and behavior. So, thank you all for joining. Do psychology, guys, right at the end, right at the end, and you do this to me. Yeah, check in with yourselves. Be honest about how you're feeling. Don't pathologize things necessarily straight away, but if things are becoming too difficult, if it's interfering with your life, do not hesitate to go seek help, whether it's from friends and family or whether it's from a professional. Um, these things that like interrupt our days occasionally. We can learn to get by with them, and that's what I mean by not pathologizing normal behavior, because everyone has their ups and downs. But if it's something that's persistent and it interferes heavily with your life, and you get distressed by it and it causes a detriment to you, it's worth looking into and being honest with it, being honest about it. Treat your mind as well as you treat your body. If you don't treat your body well, definitely treat your mind better. And and I look forward to seeing you in a fortnight when I do my stream. Joe, is there any upcoming streams from you guys before I leave so I can plug you? Also, go check out Clairview. She's doing a whole bunch of stuff on Alex Murder. She's daily streaming his case. And it's very interesting. I did a stream with her recently about why people kill their families, which was very interesting. So if you're interested in that, go shoot over to Clairview's channel where you can see it and check out the rest of her stuff, because she's uh, very interesting. She does a lot of real crime stuff. And there's nothing planned at the moment from Answers in Reason, but I'm sure they'll be back with us as soon as they've sorted out all of their life admin stuff. Joe and Dave have been very busy recently. So I look forward to seeing their stuff, and I hope you do as well. I didn't say shoot up with Claire. I said shoot over to Claire's. Jesus. I don't. God. And yeah, I will be doing my fortnightly stream here. I don't know what the next subject is going to be, but we'll see me in a fortnight, so that will be, just figure out the date, the 27th of February. Right here on Answers and Reasons, Psyched. So this has been Psyched, and yeah, on Answers and Reason. I'll see you guys in a bit. Bye.